Okay, well, hi. Thanks everybody for showing up here. Thank you to everybody online also. Um, Today is it's a wonderful day. Here we're gathering here today for Emily's keynote on so first of all, it's Indigenous Disabilities Awareness Month, and to, I guess, highlight this month, we have a keynote speaker, Emily Brant. She works with me in the Office of Indigenous Relations. So thank everybody for being here in person and online. Just a couple quick housekeeping items for you. Um, actually, sorry, before that, I want to say thank you also to Sam Charles for, his help in supporting this event. We wouldn't be able to have all this tech and, all this stuff. Um, so thank you, Sam. Thank you to UW Food Services for the refreshments. If you don't know, we have refreshments in the back. So we got water, and then we got strawberry drink. So please don't be shy. We welcome you if you feel like you need to, quench your thirst. There's a lot of drinks back there. Um, and also anyone else might have forgotten to mention. So thank you. Um, yeah, like I said, if you feel like you're, cramping up throughout the presentation, feel free to get up, walk around, and we don't want you cramping up. For the folks online, there's live captioning available, so that's taken care of. And you know, apologies for our ASL audience. We weren't able to, provide ASL interpreters for this event. It was a scheduling conflict, and so we apologize for that. But we appreciate you. We thank you for understanding. Um, yeah. So without further ado, I will pass the mic over to Melissa Ireland.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melissa Ireland. I'm Anishinaabe Kwe and a member of Curve Lake First Nation. I'm also the director in the Office of Indigenous Relations at the University of Waterloo. So it's an honor to be here today to observe International Day of Persons with Disabilities and Indigenous Disability Awareness Month. It's a personal privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Emily Brant. Emily is a Kanyen'kehà woman from the Turtle Clan at Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory. She is also a tremendously valued team member in the Office of Indigenous Relations as the Inclusive Communications Manager. Since joining the University of Waterloo, Emily has actively worked to support and uplift principles of inclusion for our university, for spaces on campus, in person, and digitally. So I've witnessed her passion and unwavering commitment to making positive change at the university. Today, Emily will be speaking on Unlearning Ableism, Decolonizing and Unshaming Disability. As an Indigenous person with lived experience of a disability, I know Emily to be a multifaceted individual, a true gift to the world. She holds her gifts and actively works to recognize and utilize them to help others. So today, I'd like to share some of her qualities with you that I see. She has a powerful voice, deep empathy, unwavering passion, and boundless kindness. Her love for her community, family, and culture is evident to all who encounter her. So with that, it's my honor to welcome to the podium the uncontainable, indomitable, and beautiful spirit, Emily Brant.
Thank you, Melissa and Gladwin, and hello, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I'm starting a new practice of visual descriptions. So, am I standing too close to something, Sam? We're good. Okay. So I'm just going to do a quick visual description of myself. I am a light olive skin Indigenous woman approximately 5'6" and wearing a black and floral dress, and my hair is dark brown and in an updo. I also had a couple of thank yous that I wanted to just reemphasize. Gladwin's thanks to Sam Charles for setting us up. We were in a bit of a pinch with the streaming, and thanks to Sam, we're able to stream this online as well and reach a few more folks. So thank you so much, Sam. And I also want to thank Sam Fowler, who is at the back doing our online moderating and taking care of everything on Zoom. And just a reminder that Zoom captions are available. So whether you're online or you're in person and you need live captioning, you should be able to turn that function on. It's going to be a little bit funny in a moment because I'm going to read something in Mohawk. So the translation is going to come out really funny as Zoom tries to translate that in real time. But I'll say each line in Mohawk and then I'll repeat it in English so you can follow along. So welcome to Unlearning Ableism, Decolonizing and Unshaming Disability. So I want to make sure I got all the thank yous. Oh, and thank you as well to Elizabeth Rogers for all the support and advice about accessibility and just for being such an inspiration in that area. And thank you as well to Gladwin, Janessa, and the OIR team for all your support with this event. So I'd like to start today with my version of a land acknowledgement, which is essentially an acknowledgement and a greeting to all of creation. So it's called the Ohondogari Wadekwa, which in Mohawk translates to the words before all else, or essentially the business that we take care of before we get to any other business. So we start all of our meetings in this way to start off in a good way. So of course, acknowledging that we are on the Haldeman Tract and we are on Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and neutral territory. I also want us to just greet the land and think about the land and the creation that we get to be a part of as well. So again, I'll say each line in Mohawk and then I'll say it in English so you can follow along. So Kanjokwa, Sawada Hosios, Gatnigariwe sa Deno de Tinuharado ne Aguego Gasastan Sarawana sa Aoyera. So I said, attention, you all listen for a short time, and together we will give thanks to the great natural strengths and powers that exist. De Tinuharados ne Ongwe Su'a. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the people. Die Tinuharados ne Yatinistaha Ji Hyohanjade. We give our greetings and our thanks to our mother, the earth. Die Tinuharados ne Gutne Garunyo. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the waters. Die Tinuharados ne Ganjo Su'a. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the fish. Die Tinuharados ne Otera Su'a. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the roots. Die Tinuharados ne Ohunde Su'a Deno Ojija Su'a. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the green life and all of the flowers. Die Tinuharados ne Aguego Oji Nua Su'a. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the bugs and all of the insects. Die Tinuharados ne Gahi Su'a. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the fruits. Die Tinuharados ne Onungwa Su'a. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the medicines. Die Tinuharados ne Johekwa. We give our greetings and our thanks to the foods that sustain us and give us life. Die Tinuharados ne Garunda Su'a Deno Ogwere Su'a. We give our greetings and our thanks to all the trees as well as the bushes. Die Tinuharado ne Gondirio. We give our greetings and our thanks to the wild animals or the four-leggeds. Die Tinuharados ne Ojida'ogua. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the birds. Die Tinuharados ne Gayeri ni Gawarage. We give our greetings and our thanks to the four winds or the four directions. Die Tinuharados ne Yatisitogo Radiweras Deno Dewatnine Garatwanyos. We give our greetings and our thanks to the grandfather thunders and the lightning. Die Tinuharados ne Achirawa Gia Jokaneka Garakwa. We give our greetings and our thanks to our eldest brother, the sun, who is hiding behind some clouds today, but is there for us nonetheless. Die Tinuharados ne Yunkisuta Asuntaneka Wanitaraje. We give our greetings and our thanks to our grandmother, the moon. Die Tinuharados ne Ojisto Corunyo. We give our greetings and our thanks to all of the stars and the constellations. Dena oni nua de chirawa nuarado ne sungwa dison. And also now we give our greetings and our thanks to the one who made our bodies, our creator. Ona do niore wakaderi wakweni, doga oteno, songet nigora isagene, asawada sontero. So now I've done the best that I can. And if I've missed anything or forgotten anything, then you can continue it on further. So I invite you to take a moment. If there's anything else you want to express your gratitude for, you can just sort of do that and give that thanks in your heart. Eto nio duhank neongot nigora, tok nigowanage. So that's it. Let it be one in our minds now, and that's it. That's all the words. So thank you for starting this session off with me, with the Ohondagari Wadekwa. I'll probably be sitting and standing, doing a combination of the two. So Sego, hello everybody. My name is Emily. As Melissa said, I'm a Mohawk or a Kanyen'kehà from Tyendinaga or Kandeke or Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. We have like 5 different names, as many reserves do. But I'm Mohawk, I'm Turtle Clan, and my role here at U Waterloo is Inclusive Communications Manager for Indigenous Relations. And then by night, I am a speaker, a writer, and a mentor. And my disabilities that I have are Beal syndrome, clubbed feet, and scoliosis, which I will share a little bit more about in a second. Oh, and I forgot to describe the slides. So the last one was just a photo of me and then black text. And this one here is a gradient pink and yellow background. On the right, there's a photo of me that's out of focus, sitting at a conference table in OIR. That's our office. And then there's some text just with the background. So I just wanted to share a bit of background of how this talk kind of came to be, or how this topic came to be, because it's kind of a funny story. So the Indigenous Relations team, this is our 2nd year honoring Indigenous Disabilities Awareness Month. It's a relatively new month, but I believe it did start in 2016 or 2018. But last year was our first time recognizing it as an office and as a school, as an institution. And we were fortunate to have Dr. Rihanna Robinson come and do that amazing talk last year. But this year we were planning and a little bit late in the game for getting any speakers, especially one with a name like Dr. Robinson. And many of my team members didn't know, most of them do, but some of them didn't know that I'm a speaker. Most of them did not know that I'm disabled. Of course, they know that I'm Indigenous, but we were sitting around the table and everyone's kind of scratching their brains, like, where are we going to find a speaker that's Indigenous and disabled, like on such a short notice? And our AVP, Jean Becker, was like, well, where the heck are we going to find that? Like, that's not going to happen. And I was just sitting there like, like not saying anything, because I noticed this internalized ableism, or this shame bubbling up, which I'm going to talk about more in a minute. But I was sitting there and I started having all these fears and thoughts, like, do I want to disclose my disabilities to my colleagues, right? I haven't necessarily disclosed that. Do I want to mix my speaking life with my work life? I'm not sure, but mostly the shame and the ableism started bubbling up. And so I was like, I'm going to sit with this. I learned better than to make decisions when I'm in a super heightened emotional state. So I was like, I'm going to sit with this. So I didn't say anything at that meeting, and then I sat with it for the week. And some other folks on our team offered their gifts and their stories and their experiences for things like Indigenous Veterans Day. And I thought, okay, if they can do that and speak to something super personal and super emotional, then I can contribute my gifts as well, and I can speak from my experience. So my team really inspired me, and after sitting with it, that's when the idea for this talk was born, because it was me working through this unshaming and this unlearning of the ableism that I had internalized in real time. And so I thought, oh, I could do the talk about that actually, and talk about how this is a process, right? This is a journey. If you would have asked me 2 years ago to give a talk on disabilities, I probably wouldn't have even thought that it applied to me, because I didn't even label myself as disabled until about 1.5 years ago. That's how how internalized the ableism was. And growing up, there was such a stigma attached to that word that even like my parents or people in my family didn't say to me like, you're disabled, even though I have three three very clear disabilities, which we'll get into in a second. But as I was preparing this talk, I also heard from so many of you that were so excited that this talk was happening, not only for Indigenous disabilities awareness, but just disabilities in general. And International Day of Persons with Disabilities is coming up on December 3rd. And even for that, we are having a panel, which I'm going to be part of. Thanks to Samantha for organizing that. But even for that, I found people were so hungry to have this discussed. So I feel this big responsibility sharing and speaking to disabilities. And I just want to give a disclaimer that I can only speak, of course, from my perspective. It's one perspective, it's one experience, it's my experience. And I want to thank my family who's watching online for reminding me that my story is enough. And it's just one story, it's just one perspective, but that's where I'm able to speak from. So on the next slide, I have just an image of the sun setting over a body of water. And then I have the agenda on the right. So today I'm going to get into my story. We're going to cover some key terms that you might have heard me mention already, like internalized ableism, disability, colonization, decolonization. We're going to cover all of that. Not in a colonial, like this is the definition and that's that, but more in a, like, let's explore and unpack these terms and let's sit with what's here. And then we'll talk about how we can begin to unlearn ableism by decolonizing our minds and our hearts. And then we'll take some questions and comments if we have time. So I quoted myself with this slide. I said, being disabled often means either being othered if you have an apparent disability or being ignored if you have a non-apparent disability. And thank you to Elizabeth Rogers for helping me with this language. I was still using the language visible versus invisible disability, and then Elizabeth lovingly pointed out that that's a little bit awkward for folks with visual impairment, so this is just more inclusive language. But I can speak to both experiences of being apparently disabled and being unapparently disabled. So on this slide, I suppose I should start by describing the photos. So there's a photo on the top left that is me as a little baby girl in a hospital bed, wearing a hospital gown, and of course having some snacks. I'm like snack queen, if you know me. I'm the person that always has something in her purse if you are hungry. And it's been like that since I was born. So that's me after a clubbed foot surgery. The top, I'll go down, the bottom left actually, is me at my kindergarten graduation, surrounded by my mom, my two sisters, and my dad. And as you can see, I'm in a wheelchair. And for those who can't see, I'm doing my best to describe these for you. So I'm in a wheelchair there. That's for my senior kindergarten graduation. And then the top, or actually, let's go to the bottom. The bottom right is myself, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sitting beside a pool with two casts on both of my legs. This is after another clubbed foot surgery. And it's summertime, so I'm wearing shorts and a pink striped shirt, obviously sitting by the pool, playing with water toys. And I remember, I have really fond memories of this day because my sisters and their friends were swimming in the pool, and I obviously couldn't go in because of my cast. But I didn't feel sad about it because my mom was like, you know what, I'm gonna get you a water gun and you can get the girls with the water gun and you can splash them. So I was like, sweet, I'll do that. So I actually, many people might feel sad when they look at that and think of, oh, this poor girl can't go in the pool. But my mom did such a good job making experiences like that just really fun, and I truly just thought it was a blast. So that's that. And then the top right is myself. I think this is post scoliosis surgery. I had a 10-hour scoliosis surgery when I was 14. Yeah, my back looks pretty straight there. Before the surgery, I had a very large visible like bump in my back from severe scoliosis. And you could see it through my clothes, and I was very like bent over and hunched over. So this is post surgery. And I just share this image because you can see I have extremely long and lean arms and fingers and hands, and that's part of the Beals syndrome that I was born with. And they're also contracted and bent. So like the elbows and the fingers and all the joints are just really stiff and bent. And for some people with Beals, they're deformed. In my case, they're just really bent. And so growing up in this body that was very skinny and long and bent and awkward, that, and then off and on having braces on my feet, off and on being in a wheelchair, obviously those disabilities were very apparent, and my quote unquote differences were very apparent. So that led to being othered, being bullied, and just being uncomfortable and really having to move through this unshaming that I'm going to be speaking to today. So yes, so I kind of described it through the pictures, but I was born with clubbed feet. I was born with, I'll start with Beals syndrome, because Beals syndrome is kind of the catalyst that when you have Beals syndrome, you can also develop clubbed feet, and you can also develop scoliosis. And lucky me, I won the lottery and got all the things. So was born with the Beals, which kind of makes you like tucked up and bent right from birth. And then the feet were clubbed. So they were like turned and pinned up against my legs practically. And so the doctors were not sure if I would ever be able to walk, and they had to operate pretty quickly after I was, pretty soon after I was born, so that I could hopefully someday walk. And here I am walking. And then multiple surgeries throughout my childhood to keep sort of working on the feet that keep wanting to turn the other way because of the clubbed feet. So that's those two. And then, like I said, scoliosis. So this wasn't apparent when I was born, but it developed later, and it got more and more aggressive as I got maybe from the age of like 7 to 14. And then at age 14, the doctors were like, okay, Emily, you're probably done growing. We need to operate on your spine ASAP. And they told my parents that if they did not operate on my spine, it was going to crush my lungs, because that's how severe the curve was. So I didn't know that till later, till much later in life. They didn't tell me about all the risks or all the reasons. It was just like, you're going to get your back straightened. And I was like, sweet, awesome. But it was a really big surgery. It was a 10-hour surgery, very risky. And so now I have titanium rods in my back, which are not apparent. And time to time, my back gets really sore from those. It just happened again over the weekend, and it just sort of tweaked, and I couldn't move without using a cane. And so again, this internalized ableism started bubbling up. I'm like, ironically, I'm like, oh great, I'm gonna have to go give my talk. I'm like, yes, it's on disability, but I'm gonna be like hunched way over, and I'm gonna have my cane, and I'm not gonna be able to wear my nice dress. And I was getting so upset. And then I'm like, wait, maybe that's part of the lesson too, that I'm supposed to be bringing to this talk, like cane or no cane, to just be proud of my story. But that happens time to time. Otherwise, you wouldn't really necessarily know that I have a disability just from looking at me on an average day. So the next slide here, I have a gradient pink background, and then a photo on the right of my sisters and I. So there's three girls. Their heads are cut off, which is hilarious. And I don't know how that happened, but this is like the photo that I have. But I was texting them, I'm like, you're welcome, because this is such a fashion crime, this photo. I'm like, I saved you from fashion crime embarrassment, so you're welcome. There's three girls here in plaid pants and skirts and floral windbreaker jackets, and then myself in the middle. You can see the two braces on my feet there. I think that's grade 1 or so. So we're heading off for the first day of school. And this slide's about apparent disability. So like I said, when I had the braces on my feet, or was in the wheelchair, or when I have my cane, and for folks who might have hearing aids or other mobility devices or aids, that's an apparent disability, right? We can look at someone and say, oh, they have some sort of disability, or they're differently abled. And when this is the case, you are always othered. A lot of times you're defined by your disability and it's all that people can see. So for example, I know that some people who knew me when I was in kindergarten and they saw me crossing the stage in my wheelchair for my graduation, they're surprised to hear that I'm no longer in a wheelchair, because that's the image they have of me in their mind. And we like to make these images that feel safe, that we know of people, and then we kind of cling to them. So a lot of times you're defined by it, and you're defined by it for forever, for as long as that person thinks of you until they learn differently, right? But a lot of times there's also an assumption of what you can or cannot do. And that's often the decisions are made on your behalf. And rather than asking you what you can or can't do, or if you would like help, or what you would want help with. So just a shout out to the Accessibility Office, who has a wonderful training on this. I think it's mandatory, so if you're staff here, you've probably taken it, but it's worth taking again inside the Learn portal. And it talks about that, how you can just ask people, how can I help you, instead of making assumptions. So the next slide, I'm just going to sit for a minute. The next slide on non-apparent disability. There's a photo on the right of two colleagues sitting around a table in an office. This is myself and a Gladwin badger who's at the back there. And on the left, there's text talking about non-apparent disability. So this is disabilities like chronic pain, mental health issues, diabetes, learning disabilities, and low vision, for example. And when you have a non-apparent disability, often your needs go unmet because nobody realizes that you have a disability or you need accommodations. So it's a different experience for sure, but what can come up with this is that you can experience shame or guilt when you're requesting accommodations, or you could be viewed or think you're being viewed as lazy or a bad employee or a bad team member or family member or whatever it is, when you, for example, need to opt out of an event, or sit down when everyone else is standing up. Or an example that I find myself coming across a lot is, especially at Indigenous events, there's chairs that are reserved for elders. And then I'm like, my hips and my legs and my knees are killing me and I want to sit, but I don't, people are going to be like, why is this young girl taking up an elder's seat? So then it causes you to have to speak up more. And then that's also something that you have to unshame and normalize. So it's a journey. I'm getting better at advocating for my needs. But I think when we do things like this and we hear people's stories and we really listen, we can also all do our part to remember to like ask people what they might need and not make assumptions, right? But generally, if we look quote unquote healthy, then the assumption is that we're expected to hustle and grind and perform in the exact same way that everybody else does, on the same like 24-hour cycle, the same type of duties being performed in a way. And this mindset comes from colonialism, the thinking that one way of being is superior, which we're going to unpack a little bit more in a second. So in this slide, I just have text and a gradient pink and yellow background. And I want to talk about the term disability. So Ontario Human Rights Commission says the term disability covers a broad range and degree of conditions. A disability may have been present at birth, caused by an accident, or developed over time. And I think that's a pretty good and just like factual definition. And then I also wanted to highlight a definition that I'm not a fan of, so we can talk about why I'm not a fan of it. So this is from the USA. It's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And it says, a disability is a condition of the body or mind, in brackets impairment, that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. Does anyone know why that statement is a little bit harmful or maybe inaccurate? Any guesses or ideas? Yeah. Yeah, it feels dismissive and prohibitive of different experiences. Yep. Anything else? Yeah. Assumes what someone can or can't do. Yep, absolutely. Any other observations? Yeah, in the yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Bingo. Yeah, all of those are accurate and so true. Thank you for sharing and participating. Yeah, it says it's a condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities. So it's saying that it's the condition that makes it more difficult for the person to interact with the world around them versus it's the world around them that's making it difficult. And it's all the barriers that are in our society, because our structures and buildings and technology and systems, even though they could be, because we have the most brilliant innovations and technology, and we have AI, we have all these tools, accessibility could be way more built into our society, but it's not. So I would argue it's the society that makes it difficult. So on the next slide, again, just pink and yellow gradient background in the text. Ableism, very simply defined in Oxford Languages as discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. So that's a very straightforward explanation of what ableism is. I would also add that it's the belief, conscious or unconscious, that able bodies are superior to disabled bodies. It's a favoring of able-bodied people and ways of being or operating. It's conscious or unconscious biases about disability. So again, like maybe assuming what someone can or can't do, or thinking that somebody is less than, even if you don't agree with that consciously, you might have that subconscious thought, or just a different treatment. Like you might have been taught not to stare at somebody in a wheelchair, so you like avoid eye contact with them. But that's internalized ableism that needs to be unlearned, because that's really dehumanizing to have people avoiding your eye contact all day just because you're in a wheelchair, right? So there's lots to unlearn. And it's also just able bodies as the standard, the default, and accessibility as an afterthought. And then this slide is fully pink and yellow gradient. And then on the right, there is a person sitting on the ground with the head in their hands. And I want to talk about internalized ableism. So this definition's from Wikipedia, which I know not the most academic source, but I really liked this definition. It's described as a form of discrimination against oneself and others with disabilities, rooted in the view that disability is a source of shame, should be concealed, or warrants refusal of support or accessibility. So this is what I was talking about that was bubbling up when I was questioning, do I want to reveal my disabilities, or should I conceal them? This urge to conceal them was bubbling up, and I had to choose, am I going to move through it, or am I going to conceal it? And I also don't want to shame anyone who does choose to keep their disabilities concealed if they're able to, because sometimes that is a safer choice. And sometimes there are real life or work consequences for disclosing a disability. Okay, so now let's talk about colonization. So this, again, just a gradient, pink and yellow background, and then text. What is colonization? We're going to get to how it connects with ableism in a minute. But I think it's important for us to understand colonization as an ongoing process. It was and is an ongoing process of brutal dispossession, cultural and land theft, where settlers from Europe disrupted and continue to disrupt the lands and the lives and the sovereignty of the first peoples who did them no harm. It's the exploitation of and subjugation of one group of people over another. And the rationale for this brutal dispossession and really a dehumanization and mistreatment is the ideology, the thinking that Europeans were morally, physically, intellectually, religiously, culturally, in every single way superior. And so all people who are not of European descent or reflective of Eurocentric standards were and are dehumanized in order to justify these cruel actions, processes, behaviors, and attitudes which continue today, which leads me into colonialism. on the next slide. So it's the same type of slide. And now we're looking at the word colonialism. So where colonization describes the settling and the dominance over one group of people onto another's like geographical territory or area, colonialism describes the ongoing policies and the practices that uphold settlers' dominance and Eurocentric ways of being, as well as control and exploitation over an Indigenous population and their land. And this ideology, this thinking that one way of living is superior, it doesn't just apply to race. It also applies to gender, gender expression, sexuality, class, wealth, and many other factors, including ability and body type. So it's again, it's very Eurocentric, and Eurocentric beauty standards and body ideals are very much the norm. And that's what colonialism works to uphold. So that's how it ultimately creates ableism stemming from that. So when we decolonize our minds, our spirits, our lands, and our social structures, we all get free. And this is just a quote card up on a pink and yellow gradient background. And I like to capitalize the word lands because let's give respect to our lands. But this is so true. Colonialism is harming all of us because it's detaching us from our humanness. It requires the dehumanization of others who don't fall under what is deemed superior, right? Or the right, or the default, or the best, or the standard, quote unquote. And so to do that, and even to dehumanize another, we have to disconnect from our own humanity and our own natural inclination to recognize that we're all related, we're all relatives, we're relatives with each other, we're relatives with the land. But because of colonialism, that humanity really gets disrupted and it harms all of our spirits. So decolonizing helps us all get free. Which leads me to decolonization. So again, just pink and yellow gradient at the top, and then we have some text talking about decolonization, which is, of course, the active unlearning and dismantling of colonialism. I also want to just note that for many people, decolonization strictly means land back and land back only. And land back in and of itself is a whole misunderstood thing, that a whole other rabbit hole that I could go down. A lot of people think it means kicking the settlers off back to Europe, and where will they go? Let's send them all back to Europe. And that's not really what the movement is. It's about returning Indigenous sovereignty and honoring treaties that were not honored, and honoring land that was promised or granted to Indigenous peoples, and honoring those, because Indigenous peoples have held up our side of the treaties, and the other sides have just been broken over and over and over. So that's what the land back movement is really about, but I digress. I'm not here to talk about land back. But decolonization to me, and again, different opinions when you ask different Indigenous folks, but to me, it also means the radical dismantling. So that is to say, the questioning, challenging, unlearning, and re-indigenizing of colonialism and that ideology behind it, right? Like, why do we think that those bodies are superior? Why do we have subconscious preference for light skin or light-skinned bodies? Why do we think that skinny bodies are better? Why did I just make that assumption about that person, you know, as they walked by me on the street? So it's the questioning, it's the challenging, it's conversations like this, it's unlearning and relearning, because again, supremacy, the ideology behind it is white supremacy, but it's also supremacy of all forms. And so again, that includes ableism, sexism, classism, ageism, homophobia, and so on. Actually, as a side note, because I see we're doing good for time, another resource you might be interested in is called The Wheel of Power and Privilege. And there's a couple different versions. Has anyone seen The Wheel of Power and Privilege? Okay, awesome. There's a couple of versions. There's one by Sylvia Duckworth that's pretty well known, and there's one on the Government Canada website as well. So if you just Google Wheel of Power and Privilege, I should have put it in my slides, but it's a wheel, and at the center of the wheel is power and privilege. It's who holds the most, and then it's each identity is named around that wheel. So or different categories rather. And so the closer you are to the center of the wheel, the more power and privilege you hold because of this colonial supremacy structure that we're under. And then the farther away from the center you are in that category, the more you're on the margins, right? Or you don't hold those privileges. So for example, it's things like gender, sex assigned at birth, race, Indigenous or like settler, if you're a Canadian or US citizen, if you're an English speaker, level of education, religion, and so on. And so, for example, if you're a cisgendered Christian, post-secondary educated, male, heterosexual, all your dots are going to be close to the center of the wheel, versus if you're Indigenous. Oh, ability is also on there. If you're Indigenous, disabled, or so on, you might be on different spots. So there's different parts of the wheel where it's actually really cool if you can print it off and then fill in or highlight where you hold privileges and where you're more on the margins. And it can stir up a lot of emotions. So I would just caution you to go into it when you're in a good sort of frame of mind. But it's really empowering too, because you can see where on the wheel you do hold more power. So for example, me as a cisgendered heterosexual woman, I'm more close to the center and the power and privilege. So then that means I can be an ally for those that are on the outskirts of that wheel and try to use my cis hetero privilege to speak up for LGBTQIA. So it's really empowering. So I recommend you check that out. And then on the next slide, again, just text and this gradient background. This is the last term that I want to get into, and it was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. It's called intersectionality. So intersectionality really names, I'll just read the quote. Intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power and privilege comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. So Crenshaw says that intersectionality is a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves, and they create obstacles that are often not understood among conventional ways of thinking. So I have an example on the next slide. Again, just text and the radiant background. So an example of what that would look like is, because it's Indigenous Disabilities Month, let's use this example. You're disabled and therefore you experience many social barriers and challenges. That's one marginalized identity, right? In addition to that, you are Indigenous and you maybe experience long travel times from your reserve when you're seeking healthcare. I know from my reserve, the closest decent hospital is about 30-minute drive. That's the hospital I was born in. But for many, it's like hours and hours. And so you experience long travel times and racism when accessing healthcare. You live on a reserve with unsafe, unclean water, adding another layer of health concern that directly is going to intersect with your disability. Because your people have had to adopt to a rapidly changing climate, you're also more susceptible to many serious diseases such as diabetes, heart conditions, or respiratory illness. And there's some stats on that on canada.ca. So you can see how both the marginalized identities of being Indigenous and being disabled are going to intersect, and then they're going to compound each other. So that's what folks are referring to when they say things like intersectional feminism. It's feminism that doesn't just look at how women are oppressed, but it acknowledges that the experience of an Indigenous woman or a Black woman or a queer woman or a disabled woman is going to be compounded. So it's really important that we also pay attention to intersectionality. Okay, I just explained that. So I think we can skip this slide. And so how do we unlearn this ableism? As I said earlier, I think it's a journey. We've been learning ableism consciously and unconsciously for our whole entire lives. We've been learning white supremacy. We've been learning supremacy of all these different forms since the very day we were born, we came earthside. So I think it's going to take the rest of our lives to unlearn, and that we should have grace and patience with ourselves and with one another. And to me, the unlearning looks like questioning. Decolonization really to me looks like questioning everything. Like why is that the standard? Why are events set up in that way? Why is that the default? Who taught me to think like that? Where did that belief come from? Right? Just starting to question all of these pieces, which are, I guess, the powers that be are depending on us not questioning it, not questioning and challenging the status quo, and that just going along to get along because this is the way things have always been done and I don't want to rock the boat. And we're taught, especially as Canadians and especially as folks socialized as women, that we have to be polite, we have to be nice, we have to not be disruptive, not be angry. And so that's also really ingrained in us, is being good and polite, and that means not challenging and not questioning oppressive and harmful systems, but questioning such a big part of it. And I didn't describe this slide, but it's got 4 squares, and then in each of the squares is a word. So we have questioning, noticing, challenging, and re-indigenizing. So moving over to noticing, this is a big important piece as well. It's just noticing, like I said, if you have a subconscious thought or a thought that pops in as you see somebody with a disability or even somebody of a different race or gender expression, and then you start to have a biased thought, it's just like, oh, right, I'm getting better at noticing those now, right? I think that's even a good first step, is noticing. And this includes myself. There's always new things that I'm noticing, and then actively trying to unlearn and relearn every day. And then challenging, like I said, using our voices, questioning, why does it have to be this way just because it's always been this way? Does that actually best serve humanity? Does that actually best serve the planet? Why are we just accepting all these policies and structures and systems that are harming our planet, that are harming our health? And I would say when you get overwhelmed by that, to think about the area that you live and work in. Because when I think about decolonizing the whole entire world, I can quickly just doom spiral, right? You can get so overwhelmed. Like, how is little me supposed to change all of these horrific big structures and systems and powers? It's very overwhelming, right? So I would say to challenge it in your own life. Start with yourself, start with your own thoughts, start with your own relationships and your own interactions, right? And then you can start to think about bringing that into your work. How can I bring this to the work that I do? So I bring this to communications. I bring a lens of decolonization and indigenization, and of course that's my role. But it's also my passion, and I want to bring it to all the work that I'm doing. In another area of my life that I was talking about earlier, by night, being a speaker and a coach and an author, I really love the personal development industry, or space industry is a weird word. I love personal development. The industry is a very colonial word. And I love it. I love reading books on like self-growth, and I love empowerment coaching, and I love therapy. I'm like such a nerd about growing as a person. But that space as an industry, because it has become an industry, is very colonial. It's very white dominated. It's very ableist, and it often leaves folks like myself not having as transformative as an experience as we could have, or sometimes even unsafe experiences. So now, because this is like, I see it as my little corner of the world or corner of the internet that I love, I am bringing this lens to that space. I'm not putting it on myself to run for freaking prime minister or anything like that. But I'm bringing it to the spaces that I'm in. And then the last one is re-indigenizing. So how can we think about some of the, and specific to ableism, how can we think about things from an Indigenous lens? And so we may not have the knowledge of that. So it's engaging, going into Indigenous communities when we can, engaging with Indigenous elders when we can. It's events like this, like being here and listening and hearing people's stories and perspectives. And I don't know how many of you were at Dr. Robinson's talk last year, or did you watch it online? Okay, a few of you, awesome. I remember Dr. Robinson sharing that she went to, I forget which reserve it was, but she went to a reserve and she spoke to elders, and she went to multiple reserves and spoke to elders about their perspective on disabilities. And one of them was saying, you know, we don't even have a word in our language for disability, right? You remember that? And they were like, you would just be, and I think in Mohawk too, it's funny because Mohawk's very descriptive. It's like, if you want to say the word toast, it's like the bread that you make hot and then it's crispy and it's warm. And it's like, that's what the word is. And it's like a sentence in a word. So I think that our word for a disability, like they wouldn't call me disabled. They'd be like, oh, the one with the wheelchair and the braces and the, the curvy spine. And like, they would just describe me individually. And so she was saying that that elder was like, yeah, there wouldn't really be like you're disabled or you're able-bodied. It would be like, oh, that's Emily, and these are the gifts that she brings to our community. And these are some ways we need to like uniquely support her and help her, and be like, we can still all contribute to a thriving community. But it's not like, oh, you're disabled and you're over there and able bodies are over here. So I love that as a re-indigenized approach. And it's really humanizing, right? When we just see people as individuals, as humans, and we remember, again, like ask people what their needs are, also ask them what their gifts are and their contributions, and then like, let's lift each other up. So all of this is decolonization, right? And here I have a pine tree graphic representing the tree of peace in Haudenosaunee culture, which is just one of my favorite symbols and reminders, because there's a beautiful, if you've not heard the story of the tree of peace or the peacemaker, please take some time to look it up, because it's really beautiful. But essentially, amongst our own nations, Haudenosaunee nations, we were fighting with each other until Peacemaker came along and taught us the ways of peace. And we literally buried the hatchet underneath the pine tree, which I think, so that's where the expression burying the hatchet is from. So we literally buried the weapons as a symbolic representation that the fighting and the war times are over, and we're going to live by this great law. It's called the Great Law of Peace. And so in that law, there's like 3 core principles: peace, strength, and a good mind. And so I really like that, especially being a nerd about like the personal development space and mindset and positivity. I'm like, oh, this is actually, this is a Haudenosaunee thing that I heard growing up as a little kid. We were taught, because I went to school in the reserve, we were taught the importance of a good mind and gratitude. And the way we started our session today, we used to have that playing over our speakers every day at school. So like most schools, you just would do the God Save the Queen or the Canadian national anthem. I think we did have O Canada as well, but we also had the Ohanagar Wadekwa play. And I took that for granted as a kid. I didn't appreciate the access to the language and the culture that I got at the school. So I went to school there from daycare up until grade 8. And then I left the reserve for high school and then for post-secondary. And reconnecting with the culture has been challenging. It's been rewarding and emotional, but also a challenge. And access to culture isn't so easy, especially when you move out and you move to the city, right? So yeah, I kind of took that for granted, but it's interesting going through some of these personal development spaces where they're talking about gratitude and they're talking about having a healthy mind. And I'm like, wait, this is Indigenous teachings. But it's been bottled up and sold to me by white dudes like Tony Robbins. So it's been interesting re-indigenizing that space as well. So that's all decolonization, right? So questioning the status quo, noticing where certain thoughts and beliefs are coming from. Again, who taught me this? Is it true? Is that my belief? Does that have to be my belief? And questions like, how can we build accessibility in and make it the norm from the get-go? And then the last, I think this is one of the last slides, if not the last slide, is also a pine tree graphic on the right and just some black text. So again, it's all decolonization. How can we make our differences the norm? I like to radically imagine, speaking of like the personal development space and the manifestation spaces where we are taught to imagine our desires, right? Or has anyone ever been in like even corporate coaching where you're taught to like visualize your goal, focus on your goal, and then imagine it coming to fruition? So that is beautiful, and I love that practice as well. And I always like to invite folks to a practice that my friend, and I call them my biz bestie, Melinda Jackson, teaches, where you actually radically sit and you use your imagination to imagine like a radically different collective society. So I love to sit, actually, maybe we could do it together if everyone's up for it. I love to think about things like disabilities aren't like, you're not othered, you just are, and accommodations are just there, and questions like, what do you need and how can I make you more comfortable? Those are like part of the norm. I like to imagine everyone is working together and tending to the land and revitalizing like sustainable food practices, and everyone's working together to revitalize Indigenous cultures and practices, and there's more cultural centers, and everyone, folks of all walks of life, are working on this like re-indigenization and essentially uncolonizing, or things like where coming out as gay or bisexual is not even a thing, because we don't need to like put, why do we need to know? And it's not a thing, you just are who you are and you love who you love. So it might sound radical, but those are the things that I like to visualize. So actually, do you mind if we just do that together? Because I think that's really powerful. Okay. Yeah, so if you want to get comfortable, I'm just improvising this, but it's really powerful because there's strength in numbers, right? So when you visualize something for yourself, and I hope you do that as well, that's really beautiful. But that's one person and that's one vision, right? But if we're going to do this together as a collective, and this includes folks online, think about how powerful this is. All of our energy going to this beautiful vision, and yours might look slightly different than mine, and that's okay. If you have trouble with visualizations or imagery, you can just use feelings, you can just use thoughts. But I want to invite you to just close your eyes if that feels comfortable and safe for you to do so. And just take a couple of deep breaths. Maybe the deepest breath you've taken yet today. Noticing what you need to just get 10% more comfortable. Maybe it's a couple of loops of the shoulders. Maybe just more deep breaths. And I just want you to bring to your attention now and your awareness, what would a radically decolonized, re-indigenized, liberated collective future look like? What could that feel like? Just breathing into that. maybe imagining where it's going to impact your specific area of life or work. What could it look like? And if you can't picture what it might look like, what might it feel like? What's your heart space feel like? What's your body feel like? Just a couple more deep breaths sitting with that intention. And let's do one final deep breath in and out. And when you're ready, you can just blink your eyes open if they were closed. Start readjusting to the light. How's everyone feeling? Relaxed? You all look different. You look a little more zen. Great, cool, thank you. I didn't plan on doing that, but I just thought it would be fun to try together. Does anyone want to share anything that came up for you that you saw or you felt during your little meditation there? And it's okay if you don't. I know it's, oh yeah, Gladwin will run you the mic if you do want to share. And if you're online, you can just comment in the chat and we'll read the chat after maybe. I also want to say it's just like there's so much power in even just closing our eyes. Oh yes, I see there's something online.
Online, they're talking about feeling a sense of community and how powerful that exercise was.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. And I'm glad that folks online were able to follow along as well. Something I've been doing lately in the spaces that I'm in is just like collectively taking mini naps. So we're closing my eyes, and my biz bestie Melinda, who is I think on the line, they call it like resting our eyes, right? That's from their black grandma saying. She'll say, just rest your eyes if you can't sleep. And I think even that, just us like breathing and closing our eyes, what a decolonized thing to do in a society that says we have to be productive, alert, go, go, go all the time. Like just even to have the space to breathe together and have some shut-eye, even if it was just like a minute, that's an act of, radical decolonization. So thanks for participating in that. So it's things like that, all of that and more. Again, it's a journey. Decolonization is a journey. Unlearning is a journey. Again, have grace, have patience with yourself and with one another, because we all are, we just know what we know, right? And we've been in this society, these ways of being for so long. But I'm so happy that there's folks like you and events like this where we get to really unlearn together. So that's all I have for you. Thank you. And I think we have some time now if there's any questions. We can start with online. And also just wanted to throw my email up here if anyone has any questions. You can reach out to ebrant@uwaterloo.ca. If you have any accessibility related questions, you can reach out to aoda@uwaterloo.ca.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I actually have a question. We're still waiting for some questions to come in from the chat. But I've been reading a book about being a feminist killjoy by Sarah Ahmed that identifies this feeling that when you identify a problem, for example, an inaccessibility, you suddenly become that problem. And you are seen as the problem instead of saying that there's no ramp, that is the issue. It's, well, why are you bringing it up? You're the only one who has to deal with that. And I wondered if you have any thoughts about this idea of becoming the problem when you identify a problem.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Samantha. That's so real. I have not read that book, but that makes a lot of sense. I have many thoughts. They're not nice thoughts. Yeah, that's the way that our systems are set up, right? And I talk with my clients about this all the time, is that the first step in decolonizing is really unlearning perfectionism and unlearning that need that I was talking to earlier about being quote unquote good or nice, and rocking the boat. But unfortunately, like, you can't change how other people are going to respond. And it's just something we kind of have to be okay with, being seen as imperfect or annoying or the problem or whatever it is, until we aren't. And it's annoying and it's frustrating, and I wish I had a better answer to that. But all we can do is keep educating people, keep educating ourselves, and hope that they'll see that the problem is colonialism and it's the supremacy culture. It's not the folks who are questioning that and saying, hey, that's not right. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer to that, except for I feel you. And yeah, all we can do is keep learning and growing.
I think that's a really great answer in itself. A question from Jennifer in the chat. How have you developed your own sense of community at UW?
Is this in, I guess, a question for the question, is this in terms of like a disability community or just a community in general? Indigenous community?
How about both?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think because I joined as Inclusive Communications Manager, Indigenous Relations, I had the pleasure of working with a team that is both focused on inclusive communications, as well as joining the Indigenous Relations Office. So I feel very fortunate in the sense that I was automatically kind of grouped in with people who care about inclusion, care about indigenization, care about decolonization, which also includes my colleagues in the Inclusive Communications Unit. So I've found really, really great community in them, really good friendship in them and support. And it just kind of happened naturally. I feel really grateful for that. I haven't had to like seek clubs or anything like that. Not that I don't want to, just that it's been busy. I haven't been like going out of my way to look for community or anything like that. But I feel very fortunate that I've just been surrounded by some really good like-minded people.
That's amazing to
Thanks for the
hear.
question.
A comment from, or a question from Sam in the chat saying how grateful they are for you. But how do you feel now that you've shared your truths and story?
Oh, thank you, Sam. I feel good. I feel really good. It's not the first time that I have spoken about my disabilities. The first time was actually in 2019. It was kind of funny because it was right before we all know what happened in 2020, right? And I'm like finally mustered up the courage, like, hey, this is my time. I'm going to be a speaker now. I'm going to go on all these stages and share my story. I went for the first time on a physical, like in-person stage and shared my story related to a little short part of a book that I got to be part of. It was like a women's empowerment book, and I shared my story in the book. And so the speaking event was talking about the book, and I told my story. And then that's when I was like, oh, I want to keep telling my story. And at that time, I was like, I want to keep these in-person speaking engagements. This is so awesome. And then everything kind of shut down. And so then it's been mostly virtual. So I would say I do talk about it quite a bit, but when you're virtual, it's different because people just see you in a square and they just see this, right? So they don't know unless I name my disabilities, which I have started doing because I feel, especially when I talk about decolonization and I talk about inclusivity and I talk about this work, it feels especially important to just frame the conversation with my identities. So it's something that felt really clunky and awkward at first. And actually the first time that I told my story, it was like very emotional and very shaky and sweaty and nervous. And it was really emotional, but now it's getting easier and easier. But to answer your question, Sam, I feel good. I feel free and I feel empowered. Thanks for the question. Is there any more online, or should we move to the room? Okay. Does anyone in the room have a question or a comment? We do have some time. Gladwin will run you the mic. No? Yeah. Okay, over there, Gladwin. Thank you.
What would you say to people who have unapparent cognitive disabilities and how they might share that with colleagues? How, how they would get over some sense of making excuses for themselves?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question and for naming that. So how would you, share about cognitive disabilities? I think it depends on the situation. I think it depends on the support that's around you, like your actual safety and your security. But if you feel comfortable with even just telling your manager or one person that can supervise your work, I think it's really important to name so that we can have accommodations when needed, and we can have a bit more understanding and compassion. Because to your point, a lot of people are what's called masking and trying not to appear disabled, and masking takes a lot of energy, and it might not be necessary if you can get accommodations when needed, and maybe even some more compassion and understanding. But of course, it depends on your comfort level and your safety, and feeling like you can come forward. But if you do, I would suggest it. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
Thank you. In your talk, you had a statement that was sort of like, as we go through decolonization, everyone benefits, everyone's free. But what would you say to people who say comments like, oh, I wish this would just get over this? Like, what's with all this decolonizing? I've had a colleague sort of make that comment, and I think it probably comes out of like fear for change or maybe a misunderstanding. But what would be your sort of response to a comment like that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. One of my favorite things to point out when people say like, get over it already. We've Indigenous peoples have been hearing this for so long. Stop whining, it was ancient history, get over it. My go-to thing to point out is the last residential school closed in 1996. That's not ancient history, right? And also we have an ongoing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. We have an ongoing crisis. We still have reserves without clean drinking water. We still have treaties that are not being upheld on the settlers' end. We still have ridiculously disproportionate disease and suicide and poverty rates. So it's not a thing of the past, but I think, to your point, a lot of people think that it is, or think, yeah, I'm sick of hearing that word. And that's kind of why I prefaced that when I defined decolonization, that's a word that really triggers people. It really stirs up a lot of emotion. And I wrote a whole blog post on this topic because, it's such a polarizing word. But when we look at the root of it and why it's needed, then it's like, well, the word is the least of our concerns, right? And language is always changing too. But yeah, that's like my go-to thing is the residential school last closed in 1996. People are still living with the traumas and the impacts of that, not to mention it gets passed down intergenerationally and epigenetically, and then all the ongoing issues that we still have as well. So yeah, thank you.
Another question from online. Thank you for sharing your story. What would you recommend as a best first step for someone who wants to start unlearning?
Thank you. I like that question. I think I would start with the noticing. So remember I shared, I'll go back to the slide. I shared the 4 questioning, noticing, challenging, and re-indigenizing, I'd actually probably start with the noticing, because that is where we start. We may not have been aware of some of these things before, right? We may not have been aware that we were perpetuating ableism, or that ableism, we might not have even known what that meant until today. Everyone's at different places in their journey, but I think when we start noticing, that's when the wheels start turning and the shift begins. So I know it's not like a concrete step. But yeah, noticing, being mindful, and then from there, like I said, questioning it and challenging it in your specific relationships, in your interactions, in your day-to-day life. And I also would say, look at where you hold power and privilege and how you can use that. And examine, for example, if you're at the stage where you're challenging something, let's say it's a racist comment at a Thanksgiving dinner and an uncle says something racist. Where can you use your power and privilege and your voice, even if it's uncomfortable, but discerning between discomfort and I am not safe. So for example, if you're a person of European descent and your family member is a person of European descent and they say something racist, and you know that if you speak up, you're going to be told like, oh, stop, you're being a buzzkill, you're just ruining the fun, you're ruining the mood, you know that's going to come, but really all that's on the line is your comfort. Versus if I were in that position as an Indigenous person and somebody makes a racist comment or an anti-Indigenous comment, my whole nervous system is going to be completely at risk, shut down. I might even feel physical symptoms in my body. So that's where you can use your privilege and your allyship to be like, yeah, you know what, this is uncomfortable, but it's my privilege to be able to say something. And you can just start, like I said, in your own relationships. And sometimes there's also a time to know when it's worth the conversation and when it's not. And who it's worth having the conversation with and who it's maybe not. But I would say as much as you can to start looking first in yourself and then in your relationships, and then when you're out, at your work or going through your life. Yes.
Another question from the chat. Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing your story. This morning, one of the things that bubbled to the surface after having a harder time getting my kids ready for school is, what forms of ableism do I carry as a parent, and how is that translating to my children? Do you have any thoughts what ableism comes into parenting and how to challenge and unlearn ableism in other spaces in our lives?
Ooh, that's a good question. I am not a parent, so I'll start by saying that. I'm not a parent. I have so much admiration for people who are parents. I have 4 nephews, and a few of them have disabilities and ADHD and different things. And it looks very challenging. And I know that's kind of when your patience can get most tested. And so in terms of, what was the question, where ableism shows up?
Where does ableism show up in parenting, and just in other areas of our life that we might not immediately think of?
Okay. I think all areas, probably. Yeah, everywhere. And of course, it shows up, it can show up in parenting. I don't want to comment too much because I'm not a parent myself. But I would imagine that it could be maybe a source of frustration if you're a parent without any disabilities and your child has disabilities, and it could be easy to not understand, like, why can't you just get out the door faster and get your backpack on and go to school? But maybe they have focusing issues or whatever else, mobility issues. I could imagine that could be really frustrating. So I think just grace for yourself, grace for the learning and unlearning that comes with it, and patience is all I could really say to that. But yeah, it definitely shows up everywhere. Is that it for the online questions? Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Any other questions in the room before we close the space, or comments? Oh, yep. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for your talk so much, Emily. I'm wondering and thinking in terms of the workplace, what thoughts or factors or questions come to your mind when you decide how much of your story and how much of your identity you want to share with others? Maybe not immediately within your immediate colleagues, but when meeting someone new, yeah, what do you think of?
Yeah. I think it just depends on what the disability is and what your accommodation needs might be, right? So I wouldn't necessarily need to, unless I wanted to, I wouldn't necessarily need to disclose my disabilities with a colleague that I'm just meeting on Teams, and I don't have any issues using Teams, and I'm sitting at my desk and talking to them. But maybe if I had like difficulties focusing or something like that, actually I do. I do think I have ADHD, but have not been assessed yet. But that could be an example. Like if I get an assessment and it says, yes, you have ADHD, I might want to let them know, hey, if I ask you to repeat yourself, it's not because I don't want to pay attention. I just have difficulties focusing for certain periods of time. But for that example, like if I mostly have no issues, I don't necessarily need to let them know, but I might want to let my direct supervisor know or my immediate colleagues. For example, something came up two weeks ago. We had a student photo shoot, and it was like an all day. The students were getting photographed all day, and they were asking if I could be the on-site person. So I'd be going from location to location and giving directions to the photographer, but I'd be like standing all day. And so I disclosed to some colleagues who were collaborating with me, and I said, hey, I have mobility issues. Would you mind being the on-site person, or could somebody else? And I'll get everything else ready. And they were like, yeah, thank you so much for letting me know. That's no problem. And so I found it really helpful to just ask for what I need, which is pretty new for me. So yay me, I'm proud of myself. But yeah, it's like little steps like that. Thank you for your question. Any other questions? You guys have really good questions today. No? All right.
Yeah, so I think that's it, right? So thank you everybody for your questions, for participation, everybody online. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Emily, for willing to do this and share your experiences with everybody. So this is on behalf of the Office of Indigenous Relations and myself. So
Nice.
here you go.
Thank you so